You're very sexy, Miles. Can I just say that first? And I love your t-shirt. I love the way you're in touch with your feminine side. Anyway, yeah, so we're loving Truth Juice. It's been an awesome festival. And we've even chatted up Bert from Switzerland to do a Truth Juice Switzerland. Woo!
Oh, so this is not just a thing that's associated with this country?
No, there's a Truth Juice Australia as well. And I think one in Spain. So it's spreading. So the idea is just to keep it spreading.
Truth Juice. It's about people not being afraid to speak their truths.
Yes. This is very important at this time in our lives.
Indeed, and it can be anything from history, ancient history, to the way we eat, to the kind of politics, to money, to whatever subjects anybody feels bothered about.
And what have we covered this time?
What have we covered? Well, we've covered telepathy, we've covered crop circles, we've covered druids, we've covered...
Both ancient and modern?
Ancient and modern. I'm not saying Lawrence was particularly ancient, but he probably was. And ancient history, and Schauberger, spinning of the vortex, water vortices. What did I miss out?
Astrophysiology.
Oh, astrophysiology, of course.
Yeah, free energy.
Free energy, and that's your specialty?
Oh, you talk about Bedini.
My specialty, yes. Well, one of my specialties, anyway.
Yes, you're many.
And that's fairly unique, that's different in this country to talk about that.
There are a lot of people looking at free energy at the moment, so yeah, it's increasingly getting important as we're being squeezed on the energetic front.
But the advantage about Bedini is you can make it.
Yes, anyone can make it.
And that's the important thing.
That is the important thing. It's a very, very simple circuit, and it's available freely on the internet. It doesn't take very much to make.
But it's down to how you make it and the resonance.
There is an element to that. We have experimented, haven't we?
Yeah, we have.
We found batteries were very important.
Yeah, got a 10-coil Bedini set up that's running very successfully. As well as I've got a few prototypes myself. So,
but you uniquely you sort of made a mistake and you discovered something.
Yeah. Well, I was when I was playing with my prototypes, I used a wrong value component and found that the circuit would self-sustain, and it would just kick power out without having the wheel moving around. So right now I'm winding coils to try and replicate that and hopefully power a motorhome.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much indeed.
Oh, pleasure,
Little brief thing on Truth Juice 2013 on a beautiful sunny day.
I've got that picture here, that big one, and I've got the jelly light, so we could actually film that later.
Yeah.
And say, well, you might see the same picture, but you see different things in the picture under different frequencies.
Well, John, we're at Truth Juice 2013 at Stonehenge, and it's a great pleasure to engage in some conversation with you because you're an original thinker, and also you've done some tremendous work with Victor
Schauberger,
Virgin. And this is very important work you've been doing.
Yeah.
And what about Victor and his work and the implosion physics?
Well, that's very interesting. I mean, not many people know what he was talking about, and you know, the talks I give sometimes, somebody piped up and said, has it been peer reviewed? And the point about people like Victor is he had no peers. There was nobody in his field of understanding. But the implosion is, the way I think about it anyway, is all our power is on the hot end of a stick. And a stick always has two ends. And I relate that hot energy to internal combustion engines, hot nuclear, repulsive rockets, as I call them, because they're working on repulsion only, and then neglecting the other side of the stick, which works by movement in a different way. So you can characterise it by centrifugal and centripetal forces. So all these engines are hot. The faster they go, the more resistance there is. That's the masculine energy of nature. Whereas the centripetal, so that would be from the inside out, and the centripetal goes from the outside in. And the faster it goes, the less resistance there is, and the colder it gets. So
this is crucial.
It is absolutely crucial, and the key that Schauberger talks about is the positive temperature gradient, which is towards 4 degrees C, which is the anomaly point of water.
Yes.
It's the only fluid we know of that's at its densest in a liquid state, and that happens to be 4 degrees. And when it goes colder than that, it turns to ice, and it floats. It's the only substance we know that does this. Very unusual material.
And it's ejected by black holes as well, we understand.
Well, I haven't looked a lot at that, you know, but from my work with water, in water brass art, from what I've seen in the pictures, I've seen nebula, I've seen all kinds of what we call things in physicality, and I'm looking at a piece of brass with a pattern on there made by water from a stream.
Now, could you explain how you do that and how you came up with that? Because this is a whole new.
Yeah,
I think you've made a discovery here, really.
Yeah, it is. And it is absolutely a discovery, which was directly from studying Schauberger. So I was running a vortex in a 2-litre lemonade bottle in the back of my house. So I was getting the water spinning at the top, and then you have the screw-on cap, and in the screw-on cap I made a hole, and it took a while to get the right size hole for the right size input of water, but eventually I got it so I could see a nice air core vortex. And then I was experimenting with that, and I changed the number of injectors
so
to make
dropping water into an upside down?
Yeah. The bottle's hanging that way, and there's the cap at the bottom. The water's spinning at the top.
How did you spin the water?
That came off mains pressure. That's the only thing. That's anyway, we might get onto that. But so you're spinning the water at the top. It's coming out of a hole at the bottom, just like going down your plug hole in the bath, and you're just continually topping it up. So I could just see the vortex. It intrigued me a lot because Bruce Lee says, you know, water fills a cup, water will fill a teapot, water will fill any shape, you know, it can crash or be still. Be water, my friend. And I'm looking at the vortex and I'm thinking, it's making this perfect hyperbolic. What shape does it think it's filling? Because there ain't no cup there, it's just its rotation. So I'm looking for the cup. Why it's making that shape? Because it's everywhere. It'll do it anywhere on the planet. I haven't tried it on the moon, but I suspect it'll do the same thing there. And they call it a plane at infinity to a point at infinity. You're going from one by a system of curvature to the other, or tangents. But we're kind of getting off, well, I don't know whether you're getting off the subject, but that was the discovery I made was I wanted to measure the electricity in the vortex, because I heard there's thousands of volts there, you know, after Lord Kelvin's thunderstorm experiments and others. So
Could you detail those, or mention those, explain those?
Well, I mean, if people listening to these words, if they just put in Google Lord Kelvin's thunderstorm experiment, you know, a picture speaks 1,000 words. It's got 4 cups. So you've got 4 cups, and you've got a stream of water going between the 4 cups. The top one there is linked electrically to the one at the bottom, and vice versa. Between them, they build up a static field till at such a point that the water doesn't even fall through. It generates a charge around it and starts to circulate. So it was his explanation, if you like, of how thunderstorm works. But they put I forget what they call it now, it detects electrical charge and it flickers in a vacuum. I forget what they call it.
The leaf?
The leaf, yeah.
Yeah.
And what that's doing is picking up the discharges, because if you ran that for a while, depending on its scale, you'll get a spark discharge of about 1 inch, which is 25,000 volts. But what Schauberger noticed depended how long it did that, or flickered, or worked, if you like, depended on the quality of the water. So high mountain stream water would run it for many, many hours, flickering. You know, dead water, as he calls it, coming out of your tap, or a water corpse, wouldn't run it for very long, it'd be weak. And so there's something almost intangible generated naturalesquely by the shapes and movement in what's called energised water, as opposed to the water corpse that comes out of your tap. and you can measure it with these components. One of the problems with this, to my mind, is you might say conventional science is a bit like is the measuring system of a certain discoveries, physics, chemistry, maths. But in a way, that's from a boat of discovery, and the wake doesn't push the boat. So when people like Schauberger developed certain ideas and started using unusual language, nobody understood him, and he was having to invent words like fructogens, dynogens, qualigens to explain what he was seeing when you develop things on the positive temperature gradient. We're always doing everything hot. All our chemistry's hot, all our nuclear's hot, all our energy's hot. He started doing it on the cold side, which was towards 4 degrees, and he got a whole bunch of other stuff. A whole bunch of chemistry and physics, because he's working in a different way towards, the cold running. So basically, if when his kit was working, or your kit, or whatever you build, is working well, it'll run cold. You'll know you're on the good stuff if it's running cold. If you want to call that the black hole, like they say about the SEG, they have to slow it down, the solar effect generator. You have to slow it down, otherwise it starts to go superconductive, and it's very difficult to hold it down. They have to slow it down to drain the power. If they don't slow it, it self-accelerates. And that's what Schauberger was finding as well. So when you self-accelerate something, or you're allowed to self-accelerate, if you wanted to keep doing something, you've got to hold on to it or slow it down, otherwise it's off. The famous story in the books, the Eco-Technology series, that's reported 20 centimetre repulsion spinning using these horses, if you like, at 20,000 RPM developed 240 tons of lift. So what are we using helicopters for? Unless it's desired that you're only using one end of a stick. Interestingly, on the hot end of the stick with hot nuclear, you've got vast investment, you've got huge nuclear stations, you've got oil refineries, and you're using fossil fuels. When you start to explore the other end of the stick, all of that disappears, because all that is then decentralized, because you can have a small unit putting out 15 kilowatts to run your campsite, whatever it is. Then you don't need the centralized grid. So there's a whole lot of politics.
Yeah, I have a feeling that the reason for the centralized grid is to generate some kind of artificial intelligence.
Well, it is. I would say
network,
so.
A grid.
Or interfere with the natural one on the Earth.
Yeah.
Because everything at present is gridded. Gridded lines we see going across this campsite, gridded roads, gridded houses, gridded circuit boards. Everything's rectilinear. You're only dealing with the input and the output. You're not dealing with the fields around the components. So my view on that one is a bit like when you interpret René Magritte did a picture of a pipe, and he wrote in French underneath, "This is not a pipe." What he was saying was, this is the picture of a pipe. So your circuit diagram is not the circuit board, but you're building the circuit board from the diagram. When you energize the circuit board, the fields around the components are not the components. And when you start to work with the fields, then you can get a three-dimensional shape, which might be spherical, which would be a far more interesting or intelligent computer, for example. But for some reason, we've been kept on this very rectilinear view of, input-output, diode, transistor, and they're all laid out like streets, just like the grid is. So one's reflecting the other, as you point out so rightly. And not far from here is Stonehenge. That's circular. And that's where
it's hyperdimensional. There's stuff above and below.
That's right. Well, if you do anything in one plane, you call it in the other. So if you're building a pyramid in material, you're calling an echo or a shadow, if you want, of that energy underneath it, like a mirroring. That's the way I perceive it. It's difficult to know which one's real. We just call it real because the way we collapse waves with our eyes or our pineal, that's what we call real. It doesn't have to be the only one. Because
now you mentioned the pineal.
Yeah. Well, so you're going to have a being that's going to exist, down here on Earth, and it's got to make sense of what it calls its reality, but all there is energy. So what it's going to do is agree to condense or collapse this wave into what we call this reality. So how would you get a spirit into the body? It's a bit like me asking you, Miles, when was the first time you decided to enter your body? No answers, they're a loud reply. Or another way of thinking about it is, if you've got heat energy, emotional energy, thought energy, all contained in this unit or radiating from it, what is the finest energy? And is it thought that animates the body, or do I just thinking about doing this? And then it gets, something seems to go through like a focal point. One turns inside out of the other. So all of the universe is in our heads, and we're looking at actions and reactions of that hologram, and it gets a bit weird. But if you're going to do it anyway, anywhere, it would be, I think, through the pineal. It wouldn't be through your big toe. It wouldn't be through the, it would be through the pineal. That's the only one that seems to make sense, because it's referred to. Thanks a lot. It's in so many so-called esoterics. All the different journeys seem to involve the pineal.
But this is important, because the work that I've done with John Irwin, he's specifically stating it's the pineal gland that's been altered, so that the seat of the soul, or that the souls which enter human bodies are no longer the souls of humans, but of other beings. And that's what's crucially being targeted in the physical domain, that our food and our chemicals are there to toxify
tricky.
or to crystallize.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with that. There's obviously been well, it is to my mind, when you look at it, there's all sorts of efforts made to calcify the pineal. You
Fluoride?
can't. Yeah, all of these things. I mean, Wilcox covered this very well in his talk. The calcification of the pineal is tracked because of the if somebody gets a soft tissue tumour in the brain, and malignant or otherwise, or it's growing, they look for the displacement in any plane of the little dot that shows on the X-ray, which is a calcified pineal. So everybody's saying, well, if you really want to get in touch with everything and be one with God, then you've got to have your pineal decalcified and functioning. But this transhumanism idea is still just an idea, because somewhere the spirit is not manifest in a body. It decides what it's going to manifest in, and if it wants to manifest in that experiment, then it'll do so. There is nothing that can hijack you apart from your own way of thinking. So, what you focus on appears. It always will. It'll just open, and we'll call that reality. And if we share it with others, so will they. So anything is possible. Why not? It's John Irwin's idea, and there might be something.
Well, it's what he was trained as in the 1950s, late 50s.
Yeah, that's our friend in the Northeast, is it?
Yes, yeah. And one of his arguments, without wishing to speak for him, because it's a very complex issue,
it is
that there is a force or element or intelligence seeking to destroy the ability of humans to manifest in this reality.
Yeah, why would they bother doing that? Because this is not the only reality. Surely they just manifest somewhere else. But there is some very interesting ideas to do with that.
I mean, the principle is not to allow them to manifest here anymore. Therefore, this domain being taken over.
Yeah, now that's intriguing, isn't it? Because what their problem is then, the way I would figure it is, what you're talking about is a non-physical entity, related to the archons of the jinns, who cannot create, but must be able to somehow milk this wonderful cow of creativity called the humans. How are they going to do that? Well, if we change the reality and they believe they're in this reality, it would be easier for us to milk them, because we can't create.
Absolutely. It's taking control of our consciousness and getting us to engineer ourselves out of our own existence.
That's right. It's just saying this is a reality, but what we're not telling you is this is the only reality. We're wanting you to believe this is the only reality, so this is what we want you to focus on. And some would call that belief, but when you're collapsing the waves in language, you get certain impressions that are not from around here, and they're very difficult to articulate without telepathy, because you can't transmit in words the whole meaning of the experience. I mean, some of this way, I think one of the sort of best illustrations is a little postcard I saw, a birthday card to a friend of mine who was in his 60s or 70s or something, and it just said, as you get older, you might find you're losing your mind. The upside is you won't miss it. So then what that's telling you is this is one version of a reality. Unless you're aware of who and what you are, how are you going to know? Then if you do know who you are, then you have a choice. You can decide what it is you'd like to experience. So you're in the supermarket of experience, and John Irwin's is one version of that. It doesn't have to be all of our experiences, because if I talk to the lady down there who's interested in wood carving, it isn't hers. So how does it appear as we're all here on the so-called reality? Doesn't mean to say you wouldn't pay attention to certain frequencies which you might find optimise your quality of life, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that one. See, the question again is, if they were doing that and it was working, how would we know? Why would we give a shit? We'll just be a transhuman, whatever that means.
I mean, yeah, you mentioned transhumanism a couple of times.
Well, it's the buzzword, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the principle of certain interested scientific people to transfer humans out of the body into technology.
That's right. Well, that's always been the gig, hasn't it? And no one's really truly succeeded, because what makes up a human experience is not just the transfer of a so-called consciousness or memory. There's something about the ability to manipulate what we call reality. So, people ask you who you are. Well, it'd be better to, what are you going to do? Describe the tail of the shooting star or the star? Which bit makes them? What is it that makes them? So, I mean, the DARPA's doing all this stuff with robotics, which looks very interesting.
I mean, we're not too far away from one of their research labs here in Amesbury.
Yeah.
Boscombe Down. We're sitting on Salisbury Plain here.
Yeah, that's right, Boscombe Down. There was another research institute just over the hill. I think they call it Stonehenge. Yeah, it depends what you're researching, doesn't it? And how clever you think you are. But
is Stonehenge that's sitting there the one that should be there?
How would we know?
They rebuilt it about 100 years ago. And allegedly it's not meant to be what it is.
Well, this is kind of weird. Are you what you're meant to be? And how would you know?
Insofar as that they deliberately built it wrong, because whenever it was completed, or they imagined it was completed, I believe in the late 1950s, it was doing such powerful energetic work that they had to turn it off.
Turn it off to some degree, yeah.
But there's not much information about that, but anyway, that's...
Now we get into another interesting subject, because when we're on our little journey and somebody drops a little pebble in your pond of that idea, you think, hold on a minute, is that true? Which is a wonderful word. I mean, you're a wise man if you know the truth. It usually comes with a bit of research, and the research is a bullshit filter, and all the information you get, some sticks, and some you just know is, I'm not even interested in that, but that sounds like it's got a certain ring to it. So that's why people are using dowsing, kinesiology, or other measuring instruments which are, you might say, non-mechanical. They're using biodynamic detectors, to discover what the energy is. I mean, that's why I was so interested in Schauberger's stuff and the vortex, because it doesn't matter what they're doing, you're still getting water doing this shape. And he was studying that, and he was realising many things.
Can you explain what that shape is? You, on your presentations, you've used the horns of...
A kudu is the ideal one, but
which tells me that animal must be doing something in a hyperspatial
What's it getting, man? Yeah, no, isn't that incredible? I think the same thing.
If it's got two horns like that, what's it really
doing? They're like amazing antennas.
Yes.
Maybe they're creating the reality and they're hopping about and making it for us. I don't know, because I don't have, coming out. But to do with the shapes, which is maybe easier to get hold of, it's a rotation within a rotation. So if you imagine a drill bit, that you drill in your wood or your metal with, it's got a solid core. But if you take one of those spirals and wind it like a corkscrew for a cork, it doesn't have a solid core, it's got an air core in the middle. It's winding round something.
Yeah.
So instead of in the corkscrew, it's an even number of coils going into the cork. And Schauberger's is doing a certain faster. It starts wide, ends up tight. And what he's doing is related. So you've got that rotation, but then the fluid that's going down the pipe is doing one revolution for every turn on the pipe. Now it's in synchronicity on two spins, the orbit round the core and its spin.
Tesla's bifilar spiral technique, but it's interesting with microwave conductivity and transmission lines. they don't need a central core. The energy is spun out.
That's right.
From the middle.
This is what Dollard's saying. He's saying the whatever you call it, the effect that you measure as electricity is going around the insulation. That's why this is getting so. Everybody's is so interested in dielectrics. Always have been. A computer won't work without it.
I mean, that's what Silbury Hill is. It's a dielectric.
Yeah, well, in the Earth you've got these dielectrics, you've got piezoelectric effects from vast cubic miles of quartz, and you've got standing waves on the planet. Tesla showed us this, and Alexander Putney's work in human resonance is showing us this. The place rings like a bell. So you're talking about the Schumann resonance is 7.5 hertz, but it has nodes and antinodes. It's got a connection. It's got a focus when it's ringing, just like the kinematics of Hans Jenny, where the sand focuses. The Earth's doing the same, and into the intensity of the sun increases. It turns out that Giza is placed on one of these major nodes, so it's a transducer for those frequencies. So his suggestion is, and my feeling is, we all knew we would gather around or have a ceremony around the pyramids, and that was your reset button, because you're all coherent. You're all on the same frequency to do with your heart, the resting heartbeat, I think it says 1.45 hertz. You're all coherent.
And the heart isn't a pump. It's an energy.
It's more like
you also mentioned
diode. It's not a pump, can't be.
Yeah.
As you know, it's not a masculine effect, because you've got 20,000 miles of capillaries. Maybe in your case, miles 30,000. So there's no way you're going to have a tube with a piston in it and you're going to go bang, because you've got to move a viscous fluid through 20,000 miles of capillaries. Come on. I know there's a temperature gradient which helps things. That's not the way it's working. When it comes in the right ventricle, the blood is decelerated because of the shape of the bottom of the heart. It's almost triangular, and that destroys a vortex. And it goes in the left ventricle and is flung out like a potter's wheel. And what that means for it to operate is, while it is healthy, the blood's circulatory system has next to zero resistance.
But that tells me it's translating through a dimension.
What is?
Blood.
The blood? Well, it could be.
The heart is a gate. It's gating dimensionally.
As well as, why not?
So it means that we're actually renewing our whole systems through a hyperspatial vortex in your heart.
Well, it seems to be the ubiquitous shape is the vortex. It's very simple maths. 1 over n times n equals a constant. Half times 2 equals 1. A third times 3 equals 1. A quarter times 4 equals 1. And if you put the quarter on the x-axis and the 4 on the y-axis, the fraction on one axis and the whole number on the other axis, you get a hyperbolic. And if you take a sectional line across anywhere on the hyperbolic, well, it goes really thin as it goes up if the hyperbolic's going that way, and take that area, it equals 1. If you do it down here and take that bit, it equals 1.
But that means that we must be existing in a multidimensional existence, hyperspatially.
Yeah, with a spin.
With a spin.
With some spin that we choose to enjoy, and we call it our reality. But the heart is doing it, and the heart is, if you look, to understand that better or more fully, then you'd have to look at the work of Frank Chester, because he's done it all lawfully and got the 6th Platonic called the Chesterhedron, all based on the geometry of the heart, which is intriguing. And the other thing to say, it's obviously not a pump. The bottom of the heart is paper thin. If you're talking about those pressures, the first go in your experiment, you're going to blow the bottom right out of it. So it's not working that way.
Which means it must be the 0-point field of some kind.
Yeah, it's creating a beautiful 0-point field in a biodynamic field.
It means that in that physical domain, the strength is not required for that tissue.
Not as we know it, Jim, not power. You see, we're all geared to think masculine from the Piscean age.
The energy must be shifting from another axis.
Well, that's the other interesting thing, is the heart isn't vertically mounted. I mean, if I was designing it, I'd probably do it vertically mounted. It's tilted. And when you look at it from any direction, it looks like 45 degrees, but Chester says it's root 3 is the tilt. And some people say if you can tilt your field relative to that, you become invisible. You know, the yogis tilt their, I can't remember which field it is, biodynamic field, or I've forgotten what it's called. They tilt that from this realm, you're then invisible. Very intriguing ideas.
But you're only invisible from this realm, but you're twisting into a different realm.
Yeah, well, some might say that's intriguing. It is, isn't it? Another way of looking at that is your flicker rate. You flicker at a spark. The speed of a spark is the fastest thing we can see, 25,000 of a second. So that's our flicker rate, just like this film is flickering, or so many frames per second. We're 25,000 frames per second. So that's what we call our reality. The sun's flicker rate is 70 years. So it doesn't see itself as a sphere, it sees itself as a tube through space with a bunch of other planets going around it, and it calls it its body, because that's what it sees in its shortest impression. So when you look at things that way, that's a Gurdjieffian Ouspensky idea, by the way, so you can look up. Because Ouspensky asked Gurdjieff, what is time? And he said, time is breath. Breath is 4 seconds. And then you've got the shortest impression, 25,000. Then you've got night or time of waking and sleeping, time of life and death. And there's a certain multiply between them. So extrapolated up to through the cosmos, through planet systems, through all suns, through all solar systems, through all galaxies, to the cosmos, and found there was, a comparator. It's useful in the effect that what we call reality, we think is the only one, when in fact for other entities it's not. It's not the only reality. And if you can alter your flicker rate, then you can alter the sense of reality.
Does this relate to the bell?
The bell.
You mentioned because that was sort of being experimented with at the same sort of time that Scheiberger.
Well, it is, isn't it? I've forgotten his name, but Kerry did. She was here yesterday, wasn't she?
Yeah.
They did that interview with Bill a couple of years ago. I've forgotten the guy's name, but he'd done a lot of work on the Nazi bell. But from when I looked at it, it's similar to the heart because.
Yeah, that's what it was your remark about the heart.
Yeah, the difference is that what you're doing is you're spinning a fluid around a central axis. So you've got one spinning one way, and
they use mercury. They use a particular version of mercury.
But I just want to get to the difference and the comparator between the bell and the heart, because you've got 4 cavities in the heart, 4 chambers. You've got the left and right ventricle, and in the right one it's spinning one way, I think it's anti-clockwise, slowing down, and in the left it's spinning the other way, going out. And they're as close as biology can get to have 2 opposite spins on the same axis, but the bell spun the Mercury one way and Mercury the other way on the same axis, because they both were circular around each other. So then you can alter your relationship in time and space, if you like. So I don't fully comprehend. When I was reading it, it all sounded a bit odd because we had very strange frequencies, which did reminded me of the Philadelphia experiment, because they were changing what is matter, and we know from spins, tornadoes, which are the hyperbolic again, at a high frequency will place one material inside another without damaging it. So we've got straws in panes of glass, we've got cows in barns, part of, which is a very Philadelphia experiment. Makes you wonder what matter is, doesn't it? And energy, and how you...
Well, it's a holographic focus wavefront, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's a nice way of looking at it. This is all a hologram. They call it a fractal.
Except hologram being the wrong term, because hologram's a projection, but this is different.
Well, if it's a fractal hologram, then it depends how you look at it, but all of the information or the universe is inside us, and we're looking out at part of it. So we're projecting, as well as we think everything's coming into us, but some of it we're projecting. They know this from the particle and the wave experiment, collapsing the wave into a particle only when it's being looked at. Well, how does it know when it's being looked at? I'm not looking. Is it collapsing?
Well, that's cat,
Yeah, this is the weird thing. So there's a light.
So the observer, crucially, the observer we are the observer. We must, our function, whatever it is.
Yeah, now this is where it gets weird, because we're trying to see ourselves doing this amazing trick of calling this reality. We're trying to observe that from a different angle. Otherwise, we wouldn't be asking or interested in these questions like how these things work. And if you come across a study, the bell or the hyperbolic or some of the geometry, you start to ask other weird questions because it takes you somewhere. If you're just watching football, then you're interested in the score. If you're focusing on this, you're
Yeah,
interested.
but if you're interested in football, you don't frequently have a score. What's the point in that?
Well, you know, you can't throw anything out of the universe. And Monroe did talk about loosh production.
Now, which Monroe is this? The Monroe Institute?
Yeah. He's talking about loosh, L-O-O-S-H. And that's, you might say, there's a positive and a negative aspect to our natures. But if you're not a creator, you want to be able to sucking up some. You want to be able to milk them cows. You know, there's humans. Good. Get them milked. So you can't throw anything out of the universe. So they're producing this energy. You might say it's negative. It's competitive. Score that goal. Shoot that person. Do this. Do that. As a polarity, as an extreme polarity, and from that, there's always a resultant energy, which maybe if you've got the wherewithal or you know how to do it, you can harvest. You can use it for yourself. So then you have an energy system that's thriving on loosh production, as Monroe's called it, and then there's this peaceful bods that saying, I don't think we'll play that game anymore, feels a bit like a leech to me. What would it be like if we created a positive, whatever we perceive that to be, energy system, and maybe we'll have good water and good food, and maybe we'll build some things that resonate with our true frequency rather than the one they want us to, and then we'll see what happens in that. That's activated, it's called activated...
MMS?
Yeah, it's called Master Minerals substance now, I suppose. But he's turned it into the church of, and this is part of the sacrament. Basically, because if it's part of your sacrament and your religion, they can't touch you for it, you know? Because there's various institutes and vested interests might like to shut you down using the legal process. Because it's not approved by XYZ.
In other words, we're really talking about the exploitation of the so-called military-industrial complex, where all energy systems, medical systems, anything which happens, has got to be some kind of material thing that they can charge for.
Yeah, and or control, whatever it is. You know, this really works extremely well, but you're not having it because, you know, the cancer industry is so vast. You're never going to get Phoenix Tears or Run from the Cure, Rick Simpson's story, or antineoplastons from Basinski, or Simoncini treating cancers with alkalizing, with bicarbonate of soda. So, I mean, that is so cheap. Where are you going to make a buck? It's the same story as Wardenclyffe and J.P. Morgan. And when he says to Tesla, well, what does it do? Free energy everywhere. So where do you put the meters? There aren't any. Oh, it won't work for me, son. That's coming down. So you've got MMS, or you've got antineoplastons, Basinski, and his whole story, which is well worth looking at with experience with the FDA, so-called. The FDA is supposed to be a shining knight to keep everything proper. But you want to have a look at the people who talk to the FDA and bung them a few bob and see what they have to say.
Well, the FDA approved aspartame, and that's a toxin.
Well, yeah. Well, you can tell they're on the wrong side, can't you? So what we call illness is now an industry, you know, rather than wellness being an industry. So Jim and his discovery, which was basically activated sodium chloride, one is salt and one is sodium chloride, still of the chlorine family, but when it's activated, becomes, I forget what the chemical formula is, but when he was treating water in a mining exploration camp in Africa, it also cured malaria. And malaria is...
How do you mean? What do you mean by activated? What does that...
Well, the sodium chloride as it on its own doesn't do a lot. It's not very... You know, you have to activate it with citric acid or lemon juice. And then it becomes... I forget what the chemical is, I forget what it's called. But one of the things it seems to do in the body, which the body does when it's healthy anyway, is produce hypochlorous acid. And the hypochlorous acid kills anything. It strips electrons off the bad guy's little shells, and they leak and they depart, you know, they die. And when you're treating yourself with MMS in this way, you have to do it very gradually, because you get what they call, I think it's the Hertzheimer reaction, because what you're dealing with are the toxins from the detox of the bugs. So you have to do it gradually. So anyway, he discovered...
In other words, the bugs that you kill produce toxins, but you've got to flush them out.
And you've got to do that gradually. If you overdo it, you cause yourself all kinds of problems. So the
Was that what they were using as a mechanism to say MMS is a bad thing?
Well, yeah, they were trying to say that people were dying from it. Well, Some people were taking vast doses and they were having a terrible time. And there was a story of a woman, I think, a long time ago, well, several years ago, who had allegedly been died on a boat. So no, you can't use that, it's unsafe, because one person allegedly has died from it.
And of course, nobody's ever died from any of the drug industry.
Oh, no.
Everybody's always fine.
Absolutely fine, yes. Well,
they have a 100% record of nobody ever dying from any drugs, and therefore they've got a higher moral standing, because the drug industry is pure and innocent and wonderful.
And it's on our side.
And it's on our side.
But MMS we know works because there's so many stories that if it cures malaria in a day, there's a lot of people in Africa know that, because he did the experiment with, I think it was the Red Cross recently, but they've been squashing their results. He knew they got very good results, but they're not apparently letting them out. I think it was the Red Cross. It might have been another well-known institution. But basically they know it works. But the other thing about Africa, it's been used for a test bed for everything from Ebola to AIDS, and also because they want to wipe out the energy that's in Africa.
Why do they want to do that?
Well, there's something very special about the energy around Africa and the people that live there.
Including, why is it in the middle of the world map?
Yeah.
And the way the world map is actually created topographically is it makes Africa actually relatively small. But really, it's huge. It's the distortion of the world map on a two-dimensional map.
Yeah.
Makes Russia and America huge and China massive, even huger. When actually the main continent which is massive is Africa.
Yeah.
And Antarctica.
And of course in the northeast corner is Giza. It's a very special energetic place, you know. It's like I suppose an ancient kind of Atlantis, you know, if the tribes, you know, disseminated and built their civilization in this, or aspects of it in this wonderful country. If I was wanting to, you know, smash up the energy grids, if you want to call it that, or the knowledge, Africa would be definitely one. So you get rid of anybody who's got any, they call it shamanic connection, especially on the feminine side, because they're the ones that hold the image or the imagination or the story of how the earth can be. You've got to get rid of them and replace them with the shamans that you want. Which is, of course, which happened in Europe. All the wise women, the wise ones were wiped out. Yeah, that's a history down time, because what you want to do is have all the cows thinking in the same way. You want to get rid of anybody who's got them thinking in another way, and centralise their medicine so you can medicate properly. Toxify. Well, that's right. I mean, any medicine in a way is a kind of toxin. But, you know, homeopathy is a small dose. So if you're treating a heart condition, you're using highly dilute, which is only the resonance of digitalis. And, you know, all the work, well, as Masaru Emoto's pointing in this direction, before him was Benveniste, did the French scientist. And he said water has a memory. How else can it be doing this unless it's resonating in a structure somewhere to remember what it's been doing? And when you introduce it to this system, it cures this. And of course he was vilified because nobody was ready to accept the idea that water has a memory, you know, 30 years ago. Is that why the tap, you know, that you mentioned that the water out of a tap water is dead? Yeah, well, it's wet, so it's, you know, it's water, you could say, but water, the highest energy water we just never get. I mean, it's the one I've been thirsting for all my life, but I'll have to take a trip to an unspoilt area, if there is one, with chemtrailing. I don't know if they exist, but you know this spring because some of them, most of them will be covered. And if they're not, one will run during the day and one will run at night. There might be two springs, but the best springs in the highest mountain areas have a shed on them or a rock. If you remove the rock, the spring will stop. But that water is the highest energy. It's not an artesian spring. It's floating to the surface because it has no choice. It's so energized, it's coming up. And if you measure the volume of the water downstream from the source, there'll be more water. It'll grow. This is the things that Schauberger was pointing out in his observations. How does it grow? I mean, are you just not measuring stuff from... How did you grow? You ate lots of food and took in lots of energy and you grew. So the water in its nascent but highly energized form, as it comes to the surface and starts its journey down, starts growing. Maybe it absorbs more oxygen and hydrogen from the atmosphere and makes more water. And the other thing is he talks about is has a blue tinge. It's like a crystal blue tinge to the water. And also there's a moss in the water which the end tips are pointing upstream. The very tips are pointing upstream energetically.
That's something I noticed last night about fire. It was burning last night. It was blue. I was just wondering if there's a frequency shift that's going on, and that's.
Well, you'd have to test that. You could test that, because the other thing that makes blue is anything that's related to copper. Doesn't mean to say there's not copper in the wood. You'd have to know how that got there. But if you could do the alchemical thing and change the colour of fire, that would be a good trick.
Yeah,
but some things are in the imagination. You know, you can get very confused about that. That's why you can do certain experiments to... You want to isolate your parameters, basically. So if you really wanted to work with energy, you've got to make an energy dome down here. Because the whole place, if you've got chemtrails and radio masts, what you want to do is make a bubble that doesn't include those, like a Faraday cage, and do your experiments in there. Well, from my discoveries of working with the vortex, it produces a field, and Grebennikov talks about this. The guy with the floating platform, you know, cavity structure effect or cavernous structure effect. So he did a couple of experiments which are quite interesting. One was a sunflower in a dark room. Then he introduces people who've been trained in the energy of the sunflower, and they can't see it, but they can all point towards where it is. So they can detect the energy just from a sunflower. It's all nice on the Fibonacci spiral, so it's emanating an energy, so they can sense it, almost like a warmth. But the weirdest thing was...
the flower is emanating an energy based on its...
Yeah, or it's focusing an energy. It's either sucking or blowing energy, whichever one it is. But you can be trained to detect it. So, but the weird thing about it is the other experiment is that he left that flower in there for only a couple of hours or 3 hours, then removed it and then ran the same experiment, and they could find where it was, or had been. They didn't know any different. So what we're saying is, when you run something or build something, it'll build a field in, you know, maybe the turbulence in the ether, and the longer it's there, the more solid that energy will be, to the point where you can remove the original object and it's still functioning. So in the vortex, I noticed there was a field generated around it. The way I detected it was I ran it night and day for, you know, on and off over a year. So it ran differently in the winter on a full moon than it did in the summer on a full moon. There were qualitative differences. Winter's blue, cold, you know, tight. Summer is warm, red, orange, slow, sluggish. You could feel this energy tangibly. I could, anyway. And so, you know, things are... You can work with fields then. I mean, that's the joke we talk about with the free energy bods, you know, around these enterprises. So being a marquee, and so we're working within fields with intent. We point at the marquee.
Well, John, that's fascinating, and I think we'd call this a basis educational supplement.
Yeah, I just wanted to finish it off because you asked. I just want to answer a question that you asked earlier, was how I got onto what I'm doing, which I call water brass art, which apparently I haven't found anything else yet to say it's not the case. There's nothing else like it around. Can't find it. I've been talked to the scientists; they don't know what it is. So you're getting patterns from water on sheets of brass, and these vary depending.
This is because you're going the spiral.
Well, let's put it this way. Yeah, I've done experiments in a laminar flow, which is a nice fast-flowing stream, and I do get a colour. I go by the changes in colour, and it's a beautiful high-frequency purple-blue with a touch of cerise pink on an edge. I think it was touching a rock, maybe. So that's a laminar flow. In turbulent flows, you get swirls of colour in different places, and those have been brasses that have been placed under rocks, either touching rocks or touching moss. And you get different pictures depending whether it's touching a rock or touching moss. And there's one which is, I'll show you on this, there's some seminal pictures that have come out of this. One is this one, which is from a jet. And you can show these later, but that's a jet of water, and it makes, it was called the feather. Now I call it Merlin because it looks like a couple of Merlins, which you can look at. And the other one is this one, which is a drip of water going straight down in the middle of there. So the water's the energised ink and the brass is the paper or the vellum, and it's showing us a picture which looks to me like a blueprint. So, you know, I've had the intelligence or the nous or the serendipity to do this, but there's no Photoshop in this. Don't need it. That's the picture it makes. That is water doing that. That is true. It's nothing I've made up in Photoshop. So, how's it doing that?
Hello.
And you only get these pictures appearing after many hours of work.
I mean, you call many hours, what are you talking about?
These were both about 5 days.
Wow.
So if you set one up and you look after, 5 hours, you won't see much. But if you let it run, that's why I say they develop on the brass like a photo has been exposed to an
What
energy.
size is that in reality?
Well, they're not much bigger than this actual brochure that it's shown on. So the brasses, some of them are quite small, and some of the pictures I do, they're on a macro 100mm lens on a Canon 600D, so you're looking at a bit this big. And in my mind, I'm looking for landscape mainly. I'm interested in landscape, so I'm going through my pictures or what I see looking at the landscape. Obviously, I mean, that's also known as the blue man, because on this side you've got a blue man with the blue nose.
Yeah.
Where does he come from? And when you look at some detail, maybe you can show a better picture. Yeah, that bit up in that corner there. If that's not plasma, I'll eat me hat. So what's the plasma doing in the water? So where I'm pointing, that to my mind looks like a plasma effect. I've got a plasma ball at home that I touch and I can create the same pattern as that. It doesn't look quite exactly like a spark discharge, it looks plasmoidal, like plasma. So the question then is, I've got one spiralling column of water, pencil thin, hitting the sheet of brass, and it produces that picture. What energy is it generating in its spiral fall to produce that? So I start to look at the things and work them backwards. So I'm saying this is a blueprint, and then I'm going to work backwards to see what produced this shape. It's a bit like saying all the best stories are written backwards, and that's the story down here as well. Because then you can say Harry needs to be over there, Jim needs to be over there for the story to come to fruition. So water's showing us, its story, and we write it backwards. What we like to do is make things that work on this principle, and it's showing us the blueprint. So if you're going to build your levity bubble, it's probably on this shape. There's a clue in there. There's other things in there, because interestingly, that's in the centre is just pure brass. There's no data written, very little.
That's almost more. That's another thing again. Nothing in the middle.
Nothing in the middle. Well, this confirms my other experiments, because when I was doing the vortical experiments, the vortices are divided the vortex and put a sheet in there with a hole, and there was water underneath, and it's all in a full condition and working. And I put dyes in. That's the way the difference. I experimented rather than particles. I used dyes, and the vortex doesn't centre over the hole. The vortex is not doing that. Only the edge of the vortex goes around the hole. Only the edge. The whole of the vortex is never over the hole it's draining out of, just the edge. It's going around the edge. And sometimes it goes a bit eccentric, it goes away from the hole and then comes back. As it does, it accelerates. So that's telling us how energy works, and it's fractal, it can keep going down. You only approach centre, you never get there. So that's why how Schauberger was generating his power. He was taking angular velocity of water from outside, which you could call your orbit around your heavenly body, and converting it to the spin of your rotational axis around that hole. So he's taking all that energy from out there and winding it into the centre. And when it does this and you run the vortex, you'll see lots of interesting things. You can have a look at some of the videos on Twisted Water Starter, I think it's the channel on YouTube. But when it comes out, the change of state at the bottom, it accelerates, winds up, and then it seems to get so excited with itself, it seems to collapse and shoot energy up the vortex, and that's what I was interested in. Because Schauberger's talking about trout in high mountain streams, which is all a spiralling flow, and they're hardly moving. They're just flicking their tail and the water's rushing past. It's cold, rushing past. How are they staying on station? They're not doing anything, they're just wiggling the tail with their mouths open. They're not swimming like, I've got to stay in this flow. They're just sitting there. And when you scare a trout, it doesn't go downstream, it goes upstream, against the flow of water, against gravity. What's it know? What we don't. Because if
Well, talking about that, did they develop flying machines for the Nazis?
Yeah, well, that's the story. Well, they annexed Austria, and he was in Austria, so yeah, definitely. And well, you call them the Nazis. There were subgroups within. You could call it German people. The German people were not Nazis.
Or what's called non-Einsteinian physics.
Yeah, well, exactly. So they just took the box, and they were interested in things called physics, the measuring system of the boat. The wake does not push the boat. They knew that. So they emptied that box out, and they put anything...
Explain that again about the boat. You've mentioned this analogy about the boat going through water.
Well, it's
the shape of the boat.
No, it's just an idea. I think it was Wayne Dyer who came up with it. Is your experiences are the wake of a ship. Those the wake does not push the boat. It's trying to say. So what you've got, and I'll just adapt that to physics and chemistry and science, is this is your measuring system called physics, chemistry and science. You know, is it alkaline or acid? How long is it? How fast is it? You're measuring something which is the byproduct of a voyage of discovery that you can call a boat. But the wake does not push the boat. And if you're not limited to that way of thinking, you've got all this stuff to discover. That's why I wrote the fourth law of thermodynamics. Don't mess with the top three, or you don't get your funding next year.
That's a good one.
It's on it, isn't it? Or the other way is when we manipulate the maths and the physics, you'll only find what we want you to find. But if in the voyage of discovery like Schauberg, you find all these other things. So he wasn't hamstrung, neither were the Nazis. So they knew about him, but they'd already sent out people to India to, they'd heard about the Vimanas. They'd heard about... they knew about Schauberg and other ways of, floating about, you might say. And they also had in there, they developed the Vril and Thule societies, which were to do with channeling, or a frequency which you might call non-local. And they had specifically two females. The Aldebaran connection, which is what people call channeling. But hers was so good, she was actually given instructions on how to build stuff.
Is this Maria Ortiz?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. Apparently. That's what I was picking up on. See, the thing is, when you weren't there at the time, what you're reading or looking at is received wisdom, or somebody's written it down, or a story somebody reported. How true is it? So the only thing you've got to rely on is how it resonates with you, and if it resonates, you can call that truth. But it makes sense to me. And so really what they were interested in as a group, the so-called Nazis, was they didn't give a shit who won the war. Why would they give a shit? What they wanted to do was annex Poland so they could get the resources of Poland plus the brains to develop various ideas. The same with Schauberg. Yeah. So at the end of the Second World War, we have Project Paperclip and all the hot rockets and repulsive rockets.
Was it the end of World War II? Was it not happening during the war?
Oh, yeah.
In this country, for instance?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the history of it, because in my mind, when you follow Schauberger's stuff, it's like footprints in the snow, and it ends at the repulsion. Then you have Nick Cook, who does the book on Hunt for Zero Point, and in the book, it's all this wonderful stuff, and, all these planes that do kind of weird things. Most of them are repulsive, apart from the really high-flying ones who change their engines, change the charge on the leading edge, and they're interested actually in the charge rather than what we call propulsion at ground level, because they're changing the charge on the leading edge and the trailing edge, or the exhaust gases, so they're kind of parting space in front of them and allowing it close behind, which is direct Schauberger. So you're creating a partial vacuum in front, so you're falling in a hole of your own making.
Yeah, that's crucial. That's warp drive in many respects.
Well, it is, and the way you can get onto that. If you study a vortex in the water, the function, I've done I like it anyway, it's an egg in a vortex, because the inverse of hyperbolic is an egg in the geometry, in the maths. If you put an egg with positive buoyancy and spin the water in a vortex, at a certain velocity the egg will start to descend down the vortex, it'll lift off, it'll float. So you have a controlling mechanism, and that is directly related to the level of water to the injection point. They were working in different groups, shell within shell, but they were interested in the output, which produced a machine, a mechanism that would allow you to travel at very high rates of speed, not reliant on the Coanda effect.
What's that?
The Coanda effect is where you accelerate a fluid, get a decrease in pressure, and that's called a wing. And that's...
Yeah, wings and boats are the same basic shape, aren't they? And the way they go through the air and the way they go through the material they're talking about.
Well, yeah, I mean, it could be a bit confusing. I mean, the wings are stubby things on submarines. But most, you know, but anyway, if you think about the Coanda effect, you accelerate a fluid, you get a decrease in pressure, so the wing lifts up in that. Same with the propeller. But
yes, you were mentioning in one of your presentations about how propellers, the kind of propeller we're using is wrong.
It's the wrong shape because it's designed on the sycamore seed. The sycamore seed floats down beautifully, but it's designed to do one thing. That is slow its fall, brake, B-R-A-K-E, slow down. And we're using that shape to accelerate fluids. It's the wrong bloody shape. So if you use the right shape, the kudu horn, the maths of the implosive effect, you're going to make a hole in front which you fall into, and you're going to be squeezed at the rear, so you're going to go just like the trout. Pow! So it makes the way the trout does it, apart from managing the electrical effects and subtle electrical effects using its scales in its bilateral line, the mechanics is it opens its mouth when it goes upstream. It's not using its tail so much, and it's popping solitons. A soliton is a smoke ring, so it opens its mouth and then pops open its gills and produces two vortices down its flanks, which are doing two things. One thing is, next to the fish, it's going upstream, so it's on a roller bearing, and they're also expanding as it goes down the flanks and squeezing it. That's why it goes so fast. If we adapt that and use it in this fluid medium, you've got to move very fast. And that's what, using an adaptation of that idea, the Nazis did, or so-called Nazis, so that they gave us Watch the Birdie, all the hot rockets and von Braun.
Yeah, that's exactly what they
Watch
were.
the Birdie, nice, hot, repulsive things. We're off over here. We really don't give a shit what you're doing. If you want to look at that nice picture, good luck to you. We're in Brazil, Argentina, Antarctica, and we're quite happy down there because we've learnt other things, or we're functioning on a
some
different...
respects, that's how a UFO seems to work, a bit like a squid, suddenly just...
Yeah, ding, just opens the space and falls through it. That's how else are you going to do it? If you're doing pushing, you're going to get hot and more friction and have a limit on your top speed. So that's why, I mean...
The so-called speed of light is a friction limit, really, isn't it?
We're back to the laws of thermodynamics and things like that, because the Newtonian way is based on things that are, you know, one body that's not moving relative to one that is. But we're all spinning on a bloody planet. Everything's moving. So how does that apply? It's a local idea. It's a local law that's been invented. But so long as you're locked into that, you won't get this good stuff. You won't get the good stuff. You won't get the implosion or the self-running machines or the... In fact, a machine is working so well it has to be slowed down, otherwise it's not in this realm. It goes superconductive and disappears. Or it takes off, or it wants to do something else, but it isn't locked. All of these machines are heavy and always locked in this domain. Those aren't. That's why the Searle effect generator, John Searle's device, when it gets up to speed, would be a superconductor at room temperature.
But he's never been able to rebuild that.
The Russians have replicated it. They call it one thing. It's called the SEG in California, and it seems to be working very well. Or heading towards. Now, you see, we're on the cusp of something here because nobody likes to admit it. Do you have free energy? Well, I might do. It might do. Might not. Have you built one? Might have, might
is
not.
That because...
if I have built one and I'm fine...
The fourth law of thermodynamics always comes into play.
Well, yeah, we would like to manipulate your reality for you, for us, and this is the stuff you can't have. And you can't have that. Don't look over here. The other end of the stick. Don't be looking at the cold. Look at the hot end. This is your only chance to generate power and gut Mother Earth or poison her. Or...
Well, we've got to stop poisoning the Earth.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's right. So, you know, we were Fukushima and now we're fracked.
Yeah. I think we're now fracked.
Yeah, it sounds like the seat
situation.
is... But anyway, that's on the downside. But there's so many people have been working in their sheds, and there's going to be a sort of critical mass, because they used to kill them. They used to horizontalise them or give them heart attacks or brain hemorrhages with special weapons that we know nothing about. There's no hole. You know, like the Twin Towers came down. Where did they go? Oh, we don't know. They just fell down. well, what's that big cookie cutter effect? Oh, it's not for you. You shouldn't know about that. You know, this is all this magic, my dick's bigger than yours bullshit to manipulate your reality. I mean, it's just...
And that finally seems to be what the 9/11 thing's all about, the control, accessing our consciousness. It's the war on our consciousness.
Well, it's again a matter of perception, because...
well, that's the point.
Isn't it?
It is a matter of perception.
It is how you perceive it. A war, you called it a war on.
Well, I would declare it an attack on our consciousness for the benefit of somebody else and the detriment of us to be in a war.
Well, this is the funny thing, we're separating it from us. You know, what is us? You know, what am I? You know, if you don't know God is and you are, then you're hiding behind yourself, and that's the game. But you're calling them a war. You're calling it a war. Now, that's your tilt.
Well, if an elite or another group is exploiting us as cows to generate a reality which is going to benefit them and not us.
Well, having now become aware of that, you can make other choices.
That's the important point.
This is the important point. This is what we're pointing out here.
And there's two factors with that. Being aware of it makes you more responsible, because if you give your permissions away by letting the other guy do that, then they've won.
Well, they've won in one reality, maybe. It depends. You're always creating or collapsing the wave in yours. And if your view changes, i.e. the filter you put between what you call this and reality, then that's what you'll see. So that's why they say what you resist persists. Because what they've done is put up a nice flashing neon light saying, look at this, bing, 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 bing. We want you to believe there's a war. So it's another manipulation of consciousness. If your point of view is that there is no war, nature has a certain way of doing things, and she's not at war, then my focus then changes. So I go and look at the trees rather than the telly.
And this is what's so beautifully illustrated in your art and the changing colour.
Yeah. Now that is something...
Explain that?
Well, that was, you know, you wonder where you get these ideas from. So I was given what's called a jelly light, which is an LED which goes through all the frequencies of colour from red, orange, yellow, blue, green. So it's changing frequency. And I've got the Eye of the Storm on a board. I brought it with me so we can have a look later, this big. And then I put the jelly light in front of that. And of course there are colours on the picture. And you're looking at it through a changing frequency of light. So all the stuff in the picture disappears and reappears because you're only looking at reflection. You can only see reflected light. You can't see light. So you're looking at the reflection on that picture, and you change the frequency. Where's all the red's gone? And then the blues. And so the blue will come out with blue light and the red will disappear. It's got to tell you something, how you're looking at a frequency. So if you can control the frequency that people are seeing, then they're going to see what you want them to see until they get wise, or they have a little journey through their pineals or something, or they set up another experiment. Because then you know, once you've seen that, this is not the only reality, because it's not fixed. It's changing as the frequency changes.
Depending on how you use your spirituality.
Or how you turn things inside out. So if, you know, like you said earlier, collapsing the wave because of holograms in here. And what you want to see is, you know, it's like Gurdjieff said, things look back. And I thought, for years, what's he mean? I'm not sure I like that idea. If things look back, what does that mean? So anyway, in the frequency, you can see it. We'll illustrate it later when it's dark, and you can put that in a section.
Well, we'll put that in, and thank you very much indeed, John.
Thank you.
And it's a wonderful experience.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for talking about the basics.